who's here to talk about the Terra Institute of Brazil. And I will do no further introduction so we can hop right in and get to it.
And I hope everyone doesn't mind. I just I wanted to make two comments on our last discussion, just because it's something dear to my heart. I had a half brother who was mentally ill and homeless for many, many years. And so I think, this is such an important, it's just such an important discussion right now, as both areas, mental illness and homelessness, are growing. So I also wanted to offer, I was at a conference recently in Texas, of all places, and there was a wonderful man there presenting on, he's a first generation Mexican. His parents, he was born here, and he is trying to use real estate as a transformational piece in underserved neighborhoods, and so that they're not gentrified and they're not changed over. And so building affordable housing in areas of Chicago, and now he's growing to other areas in the United States. So he's an incredibly wonderful man. I just met him, and so it gave me a great deal of hope seeing people like this doing great work. So I think there is an emphasis on investment in real estate for underserved communities going forward. So I just wanted to share that little piece of positivity. So I first want to be honest about one thing. I am a certified Terra sustainability consultant, but Terra, there are many different Terras, as you all probably know. And one of them is the one I was certified with, operates globally, but they are an Austrian founding couple. And so they started it, but they do operate all over, including the global south. So I'm certified sustainability consultant with them. But one of my other projects that I have been a part of and doing work with has been focused on Costa Rica and the Amazon. So working with the indigenous leadership at the headwaters of the Amazon, it's called ASHI, and working to raise sort of a partnership. I guess I'll start with this because we're talking about the global south, but so I work with what's called Sustainametrics, and there's a group of us loosely called Cobalt, and we do learning journeys, bringing in people who are interested and people who have investment opportunity into places that are under, our coastal communities that are dealing with climate risk and dealing with economics of that and deforestation, all the things that go along with what's going on in the world, particularly what's happening along the coastal regions. So there's a fellow in Portland, Maine, who I work with, who started this, Glenn Page. And so I went on a learning journey with him to Iceland to better understand what this meant. And what it is we went to the West Fjords, and it's going into a coastal region, such as in the West Fjords, and understand the historical context of where those communities were built. In Iceland, they were built largely in fishing communities, and much of their income was around the fishing, industry. However, that's transforming, as we all know. So where are they now, and what's happening? And so many of these communities are just, there's communities all over Iceland that are down to like 5 people, and they used to be once thriving towns. So we sort of see into these coastal regions what the historical history of these regions still is, and where are they going, but what's happening now, how are they adjusting, how are they adapting to both climate and to the changing economic structure. And so that his work in the Amazon is really in support of different stakeholders in the Amazon, including ASHI, the indigenous leadership at the headwaters of the Amazon, how we support them in bringing people around the world into a better understanding of what they're doing, how they're supporting Amazon and supporting the biodiversity there and counteracting all the destruction that's been going on. Glenn also has been doing learning journeys in Ireland. He did one in Ghana. He's done work in Ghana where he's actually come up with ideas of how to transform, because their industry is largely based on fishing as well. So the government of Ghana actually instituted a number of his ideas around changing the economic structure of Ghana to make it more sustainable. So that's his focus, is to move these systems, identify transformational points, and move them into being more sustainable going forward. All my work, so that leads me to kind of a general, all of my work is built around systemic change. So, and honestly, I love speaking to your community because systemic change goes hand in hand with your behavioral change, which is also about, your relationship to the environment, your relationship to each other, your relationship to humanity. And the difficulty with systemic change is the majority of global citizens that have power are not in tune with nature anymore. They're not in tune with humanity anymore. So how do we support the people that are actually leaders of systemic change, leaders of this understanding, in order to grow that understanding into a wider community? And so I've joined different initiatives that I feel are trying to make that systemic change and have ability to make that systemic change. But my difficulty keeps going into, the fact that a lot of the people I go to for investment and to drive this change don't really have that higher understanding. And so how do you communicate that? How do you illustrate and communicate how important it is to rise to this challenge for humanity and for biodiversity? So I'll tell you a little more about the other initiatives I do, and then go into kind of why I'm where I am. So one of the other initiatives I am working with is called Nourish Hawaii. The broader group is called Imagine.World. And so Nourish Hawaii, we are currently into 2 years into like a 10-year project in transforming the food systems. I have been focused on food and the relationship between our own health and food and planetary health most of my life. So that's kind of where I focus, my sweet spot. But in this particular instance, we are partnering, our group has partnered with a group on the ground. And so we have people who are involved in governance issues, educators, health advocates, farmers, indigenous populations. Everybody is sort of coming together on the ground in Hawaii, trying to transform the food system in Hawaii. And I don't know if everybody realizes, but during COVID, Hawaii was actually down to about a month left of food in the state of Hawaii. And that's because they have become so commercialized. And so they export 90% of the food that they grow in Hawaii. And they don't really grow their own food largely anymore. So how do you transform that food system to make it more sustainable, which will also help the climate, which will also help the communities that are at risk, which will also enrich the soil, and also deal with all the massive health issues that they're encountering. So what I'm doing in Hawaii, I'm also doing with another group called Northstar Transition. And they emerged, actually, a lot of that work came out of right before COVID. I went to Boulder and attended a conference, Regenerative Rising conference in Boulder, and met a group of like-minded people. And when the pandemic hit, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And I became aligned with the group, a global community called the GRC. Some of you might know of it. It's called a Global Regenerative Collab. And so through the GRC, I was one of sort of the first people invited on the platform. And I started meeting people, and I met a fellow who was focused on systemic change, who came from the financial background. So he had no background at all in food systems and agriculture, and he didn't even really know what regenerative meant. So we started talking, and he and this other fellow founded Northstar Transition, and they are trying to do similar work around systemic change. Both of them have realized that nothing's going to change until we change the systems and the behavior that goes along with those systems. So it just happened to be that Wales is in similar position to Hawaii. They export about 90% of the food they eat in Wales. And Brexit came along, and all of a sudden they had no one to export their food to, largely beef. And the UK government was going to New Zealand and the United States and other places to trade with. And Wales was like, well, what are we going to do? And the UK government was like, it's not our problem. And if the food system in Wales fell apart, it would not only affect the farmers, it would affect every element of that economy. And also massive amounts of water issues would emerge because the farmers really keep the water system going in Wales. So we happen to have someone in the GRC who was involved in Wales. And so we started a transition lab there, and we brought in 16 people across industry in Wales, and it grew to about 36 people. They were about to build a new hospital there, for example. So it was the hospital, the farmers, the legislature, everybody kind of talking in the same room. And we had a climate scientist leading these discussions. And really what they did was nothing really transformative. It was really just getting people to talk to each other and learning about what was, for example, the person who ran the hospital, what were his issues, what was he looking to do? The farmer, what was he up against? And actually moving them so the farmer had to speak for the health educator. The health educator had to speak for the farmer. So people were in a room really having to understand something that they knew nothing about. And all of a sudden, sort of the light bulb went off, and they all started to realize that what they do affects everybody else. And so now all this leadership in Wales is changing the way they build their economic system. And so, for example, the students are going to be required to work on farms, and the farmers are going to be now transforming their agricultural practices into more regenerative practices in order to supply the hospitals, which usually import all their food. And the hospitals are beginning to understand that the health of their patients actually relies on better food than the food that they import. So they identified about 3 points, because I can't do everything, but those 3 points had much greater implications. And one was water, one was education, and one was diabetes. They have a growing diabetic problem in Wales. But because they focus on diabetes, it's changing the way the farmers are growing, the way the health system is being built, the way children are learning about food. So it's changing more than just one system. And that particular group, Scotland kind of got wind of what they were doing. So now Scotland is really interested in what they're doing, and the UK government is beginning to get interested. So there are people who are starting to understand that systems should be changed, and how do we do that? But it's hard. It's hard to get people to wrap their head around what a regenerative system is. And but it's growing. And so now I'm refocusing a bit on the US because, I've been focused on Hawaii, but many of people are looking to bring the Hawaii structure to the US or expand it to other states, bring what's happening in Wales. How do we do that in places across the United States? How do we restructure these systems? So even though I was sort of trained with Tara as a sustainability consultant, I'm becoming much more focused on systemic change. And what that means is communicating across the traditional investment structures and trying to teach them what it means to change your behavior, change the way you invest in society, and a larger behavioral change. And I will say it's interesting because I didn't know, I've been really moved into this work. I was in education much of my life. My career was essentially in education and journalism. And it's interesting because now I finally feel like I'm back to who I was when I was a child. I was raised on a big farm, and I was raised in a Quaker education and largely outside. We spent half of our day outside. So it's interesting because now I finally feel like I'm back to kind of aligned with who I am more so than I've ever been. I think the other thing I'll just say is I'm trying to write some pieces right now for larger audiences to kind of try to bridge this understanding, because I do believe that if we can get more people to understand that there's this higher level of understanding and frequency, whatever you want to call it, that I feel like if we can get there, things will start really changing. But it's hard, but I think there's, I love this quote that Desmond Tutu said, which is it was now I'm like spacing, but it's I'm not an optimist, but I'm a prisoner of hope, which I love. So it's kind of one way I look at myself right now. Anyway, I can keep going. I have plenty more to talk about, but if you want to ask some questions, we can do that too.
Beautiful.
Yes.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. I really have been enjoying your talk so far. And I just wanted to give a little bit of context for Harriette about what we're doing here, in case you have any advice or insight in how that might connect with some of your reflections in your work, which is essentially that we're creating an eco-village where we have 40 acres of land in Colorado. And it's not far from Colorado Springs. It's a couple hours south of Boulder. And ultimately just a holistic approach of how do we live sustainably together. And so part of that, Nicole, who spoke with us on Friday, who I know you're aware of, she, with Route to Heaven, is coming here again in July and continuing a large soil remediation and forestation project that we're doing here. And so I'd be very open to any insight you have for us in terms of, clearly you've done a lot of work that's multifaceted, and we're on a pretty dry piece of land. It's 40 acres that are pretty flat grasslands, kind of near, you can see the mountains, but it's flat here and it's dry, and we don't have too many trees. We have all kinds of critters and birds and grasses and things, but we're looking to plant more plants and bring more biodiversity to the land here. And so we're open to any kind of insights. And last thing I'm also curious about, you mentioned Terra, and I don't know if this is even connected. I'm guessing it is, but I don't know if it's connected at all. I was really inspired by the documentary, which is one of the many movies I'd recommend to everybody here as homework for after the conference, is Salt of the Earth, about Sebastião Salgado and the Terra Institute in Brazil. So I don't know if there's a connection there, or what that link would be, because I'm not super educated on like the structure of Terra now in the world and how that works, or if they're the same foundation to some extent or not. But I'm curious about that background as well.
Wonderful. I'll speak to what I can about the Terra first. So I'm very familiar with what you're speaking of, and the people I trained with are as well. And I think that was part of the inspiration, using that language, Terra language. But they're not directly related, though they are doing work in Brazil and Argentina and other places. But they actually have wonderful people involved who are very focused on regenerating land, but they also do a great deal of work with just all kinds of businesses trying to make them more regenerative. And the reason I like Terra so much versus other organizations that say they're sustainability consultants, which is very loose terminology here in the US, but is they really feel it within them. And I think, Europe, in my feeling, is about 10 years ahead of us in many ways in terms of sustainability. But when they go in and you're talking to a business, they're not afraid to say how they feel it, how how important regeneration is and how important it is to be sustainable, but also to change your consciousness level. Whereas I think here in the US, most sustainability consultants would never necessarily go to the leadership of a company and say, you need to change your consciousness level. Whereas Terra really does do that. And I think a lot of that comes from that understanding that they have. So in terms of your work, I do have some ideas. And there's a wonderful woman I actually recently met who's very focused on soil. I've developed relationships with people who are really just focused on soil across US and UK and so forth. And this one woman I recently met actually is involved in, because most people don't understand, you do, I know, but soil is a living entity. It's got more life to it than anything. You pick up soil, it's just abundance of life. And so what she does is organically develop that soil that's really rich. And then you can, enrich your own soil with their soil. It's called Sim Soil. She's a wonderful woman out in California. And I can certainly, I can connect you to her. And she's working right now with an organization in some states like Iowa, for example. There's quite a few people who are trying to transform all the farmers, farmland in the US to regenerative practices. So many of them are recognizing now about soil, and she's one of those leaders I would recommend. And I can connect you with her. There are others too. But there is definitely an ability to transform your soil. And there's so many great practices that people have put on, have shared online and so forth. There's another young man who is now working with, he was working at a farm. Will Harris has White Oaks Pastures is probably the best known, largest regenerative farm in the United States. And it's in the poorest community in the United States. Apparently, it's in Georgia, southern Georgia. And so Will Harris, a friend of mine, Wyatt Ball, who is much younger than I am, it's like Z's age, he's been working out in Boulder for some time in Colorado. He was actually in Colorado for quite some time working. He then went to Will Harris's farm for quite some time. He's now working with the Savory Institute. And I should connect you because he is just one of the most wonderful young men, and he knows so much about soil on the ground, and he does pass through Colorado quite a bit. So it might be a great opportunity. He would love to, I'm sure, stop and assist at some level. And he's just a great resource. He is now part of the Savory Institute, is trying to expand farm to market practices all over the world to help small subsistence farmers share their products and sell their products. So that's what his focus is right now. And
what's his name one more time? Sorry.
Wyatt Ball is his name. And he's just a really, really cherished human being. He's a wonderful, wonderful human being. And actually pre-COVID, right before COVID, he was in the Bahamas working with regenerative farmers in the Bahamas. So he's been doing this for a long, long time, even though he's very young. So, but anyway, I would say, and I can connect you with Wyatt too. He's always loves connecting with people. So terrific. And what was the other? Oh, you were saying something else, and now I can't remember quite what you were saying, but I will say, speaking to the other, just touching on Z and also the relationship that I've learned so much from Z and the communities that he's been involved in, but also touching on the homelessness that you were just talking about is when I was, I've been single for some time, and so Z invited quite a few friends to come live with us, and much to my other children's dissatisfaction at times, they felt like I had too many children. And but there were quite a few young men. Z had about 5 friends who moved in, and but at the same time, it was probably, I mean, it was great for all of us, but the children, my other children actually have grew so much during that time. I mean, many of these young men would have been homeless had they not come lived with me. And they were just an essential part of our lives. And for my younger daughter and my younger son, it was like they had 5 brothers. And frankly, the other boys nicer to them than Z was much of the time. So, but it was so great to have this understanding that you're not here just for yourself, that you are you're in a shared community. That I think that's a large problem with what's going on is I say it candidly in my own sisters and brothers and people I know, that everybody's focused on only their own children and their own little community, and bringing all these other people into our lives and having them live with us really changed the way my other children approach society too, and realize that we are all in this together. We are all one large community. So I love the idea of expanding that attitude somehow. And I haven't quite figured that out, but it's something I think about often.
Thank you so much. I want to open for a couple audience questions, if that's all right. We are going to have brunch after this, so we do have time for a couple questions. And yeah, I just want to say thank you again. I think we could continue on for a long time, and I hope we do next time and continue. We'd like to invite you again, and really grateful for you offering to contribute in this way. So
thank you.
Good to connect. Yeah. Does anybody? Okay, Padme.
Aloha, I am Padme. I am not Kamahina, but I've spent about 3 years of my life on the Big Island of Hawaii, which has the most land for farmland out there. And as we know, 2018 had the lava flow come through. There was a stipend put by the government to help for farmlands to have money to help develop more farm, particularly on the East Coast in like Pahoa and Lower Puna area, which is where I have land and live. And the government isn't actually allowing much building take place there. I help with community development in the area, and I'm working with some communities that won't allow concrete to come in to build buildings for them to process and break down their food that they're having. Even though there's a lot of food forest in the area currently, I've been working with local intentional communities, particularly in the Puna area. There's about 14 of them in that like 20-30 mile area. And I've been creating this dating, basically having communities date each other, meet each other, and also working with the local Hawaiians. And we're currently in the process of donating a percentage of all of the community lands to local Hawaiians to grow taro and breadfruit to bring more food to that area. For we do know 90% of the food, and we did have a huge, like you said, only 1 month left of food that was actually available. And, we're reaching a really critical point during that time. And so what I'm wanting to speak upon is I would love to hear more. I'd love to contact with you and what you're doing in Hawaii, how I can get involved and help bring that awareness, as well as help maybe the indigenous have more land in that area and bring more farmland. For it is just, as we know, tropical climates have the ability to just grow so much food. And we have these large corporations and industries coming in doing mass crop and papaya and taking over these lands that were local indigenous. And so really wanting to work with the locals that are there to help the indigenous culture take back their land and set up farms. So something I'm really passionate about, as I'll be spending half my life, half the years out there. So I just wanted to touch on that because I think that's beautiful what you're doing out there.
Oh, I thank you. I love what you've done out there. That's just so impressive and inspiring. I think what I should do is, and I can send it to the emails, Yasha's email and so forth. I should give you the contact we have there that's on our team, because he is a wonderful, wonderful man. And he lives in Puna. I mean, he's right there, and he may know some people in common too, but What?
Is it Armano?
No, no, but you'll love him. I mean, he's a terrific person, but I should have you connect with you. I should also connect you with another fellow, Christopher Spazona. He grew up in Hawaii. He is like, I mean, he's one of those people you talk to that you can tell his brain's operating at all these levels that you're like, you know, he's just that smart, but he does know how to come down to earth sometimes. But he lives in Hawaii, grew up in Hawaii, and he did during the pandemic, he actually started helping Hawaii to bring goods in. But then he was doing such a good job, the UN actually hired him to like move goods all over the world. And he's kind of this crazy hippie in a way. I shouldn't say hippie, but he's just this sort of really interesting character. But he's another person, and he is, we've now brought him together to work with us too. He's big into software too. So he's kind of working on this game that to get young people enter into forest, and then you go in and out and try to save the world. And, you know, but he would be a good person too, because he's got so many contacts in Hawaii. So I can connect with both of them.
That's the person I want to hang out with. So
yeah, it's really interesting.
Amazing. We have time for maybe one or two more. Got another consultant here. Yeah, go for it.
Hey there, my name is Argon, and just really appreciating the holistic orientation that you're bringing into this space. I spent 5 years on the board of the Global Ecovillage network doing a lot of regenerative development work, specifically in Europe. And about 5 years ago, life asked me to move back into the heart of a small city, and I chose Boulder, Colorado. And one of the greatest challenges and initiations I would say I've been going through after working in Europe, where there's so much municipal funding available for regenerative consultant type work or continuing adult education through Erasmus or whatever, is how to actually fund this kind of whole systems change work in the United States specifically. So hearing that you're moving in this direction, I'm really curious, any like tips that you have, because what I've found so far is it's either sort of greenwash what it is that we're up to by working with various businesses that want to have a good ESG rating, or this kind of thing that really kills a lot of the heart of what it is that I'm in this work for. And then other than that, finding, you know, the like white, you know, like the unicorn of the wealthy individual who actually wants to have this level of conversation. And so I'm curious what you've been learning, specifically, where I've been orienting to is starting to actually convene more mastermind groups in collaborative environments, having different heads of different organizations come together and, like you said, have this like aha moment of how all these different verticals actually intersect. But I'm curious, anything you could say about that sort of convening, as well as how you've been looking at creating an investment strategy for this kind of work in the US specifically.
That is such a great question. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. It's been really hard. I do a lot of work for free, and I think it's now going to start transforming. But my one word I would use right now is I've had to have incredible patience, and it's hard. It's really hard. And I admire, because in the US, it's really, really hard. And whereas I get into conversations with people in Europe, I mean, I was just talking to it's something maybe the Eco Village would like to align with, and I could introduce you to this woman. But I met this woman, she must be maybe 21, 22. She's Ukrainian, and she's in Germany right now. She's trying to build regenerative communities along the western border of Ukraine and in other areas, so that Ukrainians don't have to live in refugee camps. And so she's trying to build out these regenerative communities. And she's like 21 or 22 years old. And those are the things that really motivate me. And so I'll be honest with you, it's really hard for me to focus on the financial aspect, but I have to. And but when I say patience, I think now, because I've been doing much of what you're saying, I've just been trying to listen and collaborate and learn and really develop partnerships. And so now I've gotten to the point that people now are connecting with me. who have money. And but it's been a sort of a long time coming. And the initiatives I'm working with, all the people I work with have other jobs. They all have like set jobs that they get a salary from. And so it's been hard, but I will say that I'm now at this point that, people are starting to understand the value I bring. And so people who are connected to investment communities, who are slowly beginning to understand that systems level thinking is really important, they're starting to now bring people like you and myself into the conversation. And because I didn't want to just go in and work for a business and say, oh yeah, here's your report, here's your, it's so meaningless to me. And I also feel an urgency for the next generations. I've never felt I'm doing this for myself. I'm doing this because we have responsibility to it. And frankly, I feel like my generation really failed. And so I feel it's really important work to be done. And but I am starting to see it. And a perfect example is this fellow who is the chief ESG advisor to the UN, who I have, I've connected with him on LinkedIn, but I don't know him or anything. He reached out to me and we had a conversation the other day, and we could have just talked for hours. He is an amazing human being, because he's got this finance side to him. He has his own investment firm. He operates a great deal under management, but he has this other side to him. He's done, he really believes in the work organizations such as yourself are doing, such as the Ecovillage, such as, Golden Drum, he really understands that at a level because he's done silent retreats. He has, and so one of the last things he said to me is, I really want to go up to see your son's community, and I want to see what they're doing, and I want to help them. And I was just like, but that doesn't happen very often. But I'm getting to meet the people in the investment community that are like that now. And so the fellow who invited me to Houston is, believe it or not, I mean, Houston is, I'm not a big Houston fan, so I shouldn't say that, but it's, it's like, to me, the den of oil industry. But so I get down there and I'm like, what am I doing here? But here's the guy. He's like, well, first off, this is the night before, he had a cocktail party and I had no idea what to expect. I had never met him. We've talked on the phone multiple times. So I get there and to this cocktail party, I'm by myself, and I walk in and I don't know where he is. I've never met any of these people. And so I walk in and I finally find him. Here he is with like puka beads in bare feet and all this stuff. And this is like an oil community in Houston. I was just in shock. I was just like, wow, this is not what I expected. And sure enough, I was just blown away. And the next day, I have to say, I really learned so much from this fellow, because he gets up on stage, he runs this innovation conference. He had all these conservative investors in the audience, and he gets up there, and what he does, in his cowboy boots, no tie, just hanging out, he gets up there and he's like, I come from where you guys are. I mean, he aligns himself with these investors immediately by saying, I had these advantages. I grew up advantaged. I grew up having, he has since told me his whole story, but, he said, I've had the advantages you've had, but this is why but we're no longer any, and he just, the way he speaks is just unbelievable. He really has a great, is this great sense of communication with diverse audiences. I was really impressed. And one by one, he's bringing up, community leadership and why you should invest in underserved communities. He's bringing in people who are investing in renewables. He's bringing up some people who are investing in regenerative ag. And he had that audience just locked in. And I was like, okay, this is the way to do it, and so that's what I aspire to so I'm going to do more with this fellow, but I think I just have to believe that we're going to be able to make more and more inroads into the people who, and I will say also on that note, I'm working, the only other thing I didn't mention, I work with this news agent. It's like a newsroom called Circle Blue. And they're at the intersection of water, investigative reporting, and science and data. And so they do these narratives, and he's been an investigative reporter since he was 16 years old, the guy who runs this. And so I helped him develop a proposal for Mark Benioff, who's started Salesforce. And I have to say that, you know, he went and he presented, and not everybody, but people like Mark Benioff, and I'm not saying anything good or bad or whatever, but people, you know, there are billionaires who are recognizing that they, you know, their money really isn't going to matter unless they put money into something that transforms the world. And I just have to hope that that momentum that I'm seeing is going to continue to build. But part of it is supporting work that you guys do with that consciousness level. I really believe that wholeheartedly. And so part of what I do is try to bring that into the conversation, because until we change people's consciousness, I mean, I know the points in my life that changed that level to me. It transformed me. And not that I didn't love the environment. I've been an environmentalist my whole life. I've understood climate change for a long time. I started a nonprofit communicating around climate risk. And so I've been speaking on it for a long time, but that was different than all of a sudden feeling the relationship inside that I had with nature. And that was a real transformation for me. But, you know, I wish everybody could have that, but it's hard to explain that to people.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you for that.
So we have one last question from Bloom, unless somebody wants to like really get that last spot afterwards. Okay. All right, Bloom, last question.
I'll be brief, and this is more of a comment of encouragement and excitement based on what you were just sharing. I have a handful of friends that were just at the World Economic Forum, and that's where a lot of the top like financial and political leaders go for this big, they call it like the Burning Man of business. And the main topics this year, I've been following my friends' stories, the main topics were climate change and carbon credits, cryptocurrency and NFTs and Web3, and psychedelics and indigenous wisdom. They actually had a whole psychedelic house, and they brought all these indigenous elders to come and talk. And there were lawyers talking about how can we do more work decriminalizing and legalizing these substances. And this is like one of the gatherings where some of the top leaders of the world go, and these are the main topics being talked about right now. So it's really exciting. And I have met and connected with different people that they're most likely billionaires that are very excited about using their funds and also their network to make positive change. And yeah, there's a guy here in Boulder that I met. His dad invented the algorithm that the online stock market runs on. So he took that idea and he said, what if we do something similar to the stock market, but where the extra funds go directly to supporting the planet and the water and the indigenous and all these things that actually need money directed towards rather than into already big bank accounts. And then, yeah, there's just all sorts of exciting projects and people that are just ready to jump on a project or a movement as soon as they see that something is happening that inspires them, that excites them, that they want to put their energy into. So yeah, just sharing some of that excitement.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing. It's so true. It's really exciting. And you actually just made me think of someone else. There's two women that I've been connected to, Jamaica and Caitlin. I'm going to introduce her to you guys because they've been creating this platform that is doing pretty incredible work. And the one girl was in finance and she's using her knowledge to bring funding to projects that are regenerative and doing great work and figuring out, using software platform, how to make that work, seeing better and people have better access and so forth. So I should introduce you. I just realized that I will make that happen, but thank you for sharing that. The other great forum, if you ever want to watch some is Stockholm 50. Stockholm plus 50 was going on right after Davos.
Amazing. Wow, this is crazy high level stuff. Y'all are super connected out here. This is fun. Wow, yo, I'm just blown away. Thank you, Harriette. Our mission is peace.